can see all this. Well, we've entered what by the 19th century was the largest burial ground in the City of London, Christ Church, Greyfriars. To this day, it remains one of the city's more atmospheric graveyards in that by night it is still lit by the dull glow of gas lamp lighting. It's also one of the few burial grounds that still has its cargo of dead largely intact. Over by that railing there's a tabletop tomb. Over by that railing over there's a chest tomb. And those of you standing over there, and over there, if you care now to study the ground beneath your feet, you'll notice you are in fact standing on burial vaults, and beneath you, in vaults, some of which have not seen the light of day for over 100 years, sleep long dead parishioners of this parish. What is of particular interest for us tonight is the tombstone just here, because carved onto this tombstone there is the sign of a skull and crossbones, and that is a warning placed there by our ancestors to warn us that the person buried there died of something horribly contagious such as bubonic plague or smallpox, and they are warning us under no circumstances stand on or go anywhere near that tomb over there. But in the Middle Ages, the site over here was occupied by the monastery of the Greyfriars, and they wore grey habits and were thus known as the Greyfriars. And such was their reputation for piety, the belief sprang up that no matter how bad your life had been, if when you died you could secure burial for your mortal remains within the precincts of the Greyfriars monastery, when you got to the gates of heaven, St. Peter would welcome you in with open arms. And so those who led not exactly exemplary lives, when that fatal day drew nigh, they would use their power, their influence, and this being the church, let's not forget most important of all, their money, to secure burial within the precincts of the Greyfriars monastery. Amongst them, one of the most infamous queens to ever strut her stuff across the pages of English history. I speak here of Queen Isabella, the she-wolf of France, the wife of King Edward II. With her lover, Roger Mortimer, she deposed Edward and locked him up in the tower at Berkeley Castle. But then they realized as long as he was alive, they were in danger. But here's the problem. Here's their problem. How do you kill a king in the days when a monarch dies, they are laid out in state, stark naked, and then their subjects will file past the cadaver and they will see if there's been foul play. Strangulation shows up, stab wounds show up, even poisoning shows up as a discoloration of certain extremities. So how do you kill a king in such a way it isn't going to show up after he's died? Well, after a few attempts, they sent word to his jailers, Sir John Maltravers and Sir Thomas Gurney, and they told the jailers, dispose of the king as you see fit. And thus it was, according to the chronicles of the age, they did enter the king's bedchamber as midnight approached. The king sat up to greet them. They seized him, they stripped him, they held him face down, and thence by way of a funnel horn of bone, they didst run a red hot spit up the king's fundament and did put out his bowels. Well, it did the trick, killed him outright. They laid him out naked. Be honest, who's going to look that closely? And then Mortimer and Isabella settled down to rule as regents on behalf of his son, the 40-year-old boy king, Edward III. And they thought, being Edward II's son, Edward III, he'll be a pushover. But they misjudged him. It wasn't his father's spirit Edward III inherited, it was his grandfather's spirit. And his grandfather was Longshanks, Edward I, the hammer of the Scots, the hammer of the Welsh, the hammer, well, of just about anybody he fancied hammering. When Edward III turned 18, he led 30 trusted knights up to Nottingham Castle, where Mortimer and Isabella were holding court. They burst in on them, and despite his mother's pleadings, kind son, have pity on the gentle Mortimer, he was dragged to London and hanged, drawn and quartered. Isabella then went into polite retirement and spent many of her latter years at Castle Rising Castle in Norfolk. And And if you want a spooky, haunted castle to visit, I cannot recommend that one highly enough. Castle Rising Castle. So spooky, they named it twice. Go there at close of day. Walk its whitewashed corridors and its crumbling dungeons, and you will just sense the eyes of former residents as they watch your every move. Amongst them is Isabella herself, who towards the end of her life was showing signs of dementia, and she was in fact coming back for treatment in London when she died at a castle in Hertford. But as she lay dying, it suddenly dawned on her she had probably not led an exactly exemplary life. So she called her son, Edward III, to her, and she made him promise when she was dead, he would bury her within the precincts of the Greyfriars Monastery. Furthermore, he would bury her wearing the cowl and the robe of a Greyfriar monk. In this way, she literally hoped she could hoodwink her way past St. Peter, who, when he saw her coming to the gates of heaven, would mistake her for a humble monk and not see coming Isabella, the she-wolf of France. Well, Edward complied with the first part of the wish, in that she was buried somewhere within the precincts of the monastery. But as for the second part, she most certainly was not buried disguised as a monk. Oh no, Edward had an eternal torment for his mother, and he buried her in her wedding dress, and into the casket he placed upon her heart, on her breast, the preserved heart of her murdered husband, Edward II. And by the 19th century, this had become that immense burial ground. And they said they often used to see her ghost on misty autumn mornings, a very beautiful, though angry ghost, skulking amongst the tombstones, clutching before her the still beating heart of her murdered husband, Edward II. Ladies and gentlemen, as Edward II might say, if you'd like to walk, this way. Follow me past the site of the monastery, now ironically Merrill Lynch.